The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, sealed with the Duke of Ashford's crest, a raven clutching an olive branch. Miss Eleanor Hartley's hands trembled as she broke the wax, her modest parlour suddenly feeling smaller, the walls pressing in with the weight of opportunity. The position, companion to Lady Catherine Ashford, the Duke's younger sister, recently returned from the continent in fragile spirits. The salary, more than Eleanor had earned in 3 years as a governess. But it was the final line that stole her breath. "You come highly recommended for your discretion and gentle nature." Discretion. The word hung in the air like smoke. What secrets did Ashford Hall hold that required such careful silence? As Eleanor folded the letter, her reflection caught in the window glass, a young woman of modest beauty, chestnut hair pulled severely back, grey eyes that had learned to expect little. She could not know that accepting this position would unravel everything she believed about her place in the world, nor that the Duke himself would become the most dangerous secret of all. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments from which part of the world you're listening to this story. I want to know how far it has travelled. The journey to Ashford Hall took 2 days by coach, winding through the verdant countryside of Hampshire as spring surrendered to early summer. Eleanor pressed her face to the window, watching hedgerows blur into fields of rapeseed, their yellow blooms bright against an uncertain sky. She had packed everything she owned into a single trunk: 3 dresses, 2 nightgowns, her mother's silver brush, and a collection of books that had been her only companions through years of solitary employment. The coaching inn where she spent the night smelled of mutton and damp wool. Eleanor lay awake on a narrow bed, listening to the sounds of travellers in adjacent rooms, wondering what manner of household she was entering. The Duke of Ashford was a figure of legend, even in her limited social sphere, a man who had inherited his title at 23 after his father's sudden death, who had steered the family's considerable fortune through the uncertain years following the Napoleonic Wars with remarkable acumen. He was unmarried at 32, which sparked endless speculation in the society pages Eleanor sometimes glimpsed in discarded newspapers. But it was Lady Catherine who occupied Eleanor's thoughts most urgently. The agency had provided few details, only that the young woman, now 21, had returned from an extended stay in Italy under circumstances that required delicate handling. Eleanor had learned through years of service in other households that such phrases concealed a multitude of sorrows. The coach arrived at Ashford Hall just as the afternoon sun broke through gathering clouds, illuminating the estate in theatrical splendour. Eleanor's breath caught. The house rose from manicured grounds like something from a Gothic novel, all honey-coloured stone and soaring windows, with ivy climbing the eastern wing in dark green cascades. The drive curved through an avenue of ancient oaks, their branches forming a cathedral arch overhead. A footman in immaculate livery handed her down from the coach with more courtesy than she had expected. "Miss Hartley, Mrs. Pemberton is expecting you. I'll see to your trunk." The housekeeper, who met her in the entrance hall, was a woman of perhaps 50, with steel-grey hair and eyes that assessed Eleanor with professional thoroughness. "You're younger than I anticipated," Mrs. Pemberton said without preamble, "but Lady Catherine may find that agreeable. She's grown weary of elderly companions who treat her like an invalid." Eleanor followed the housekeeper through corridors that seemed designed to overwhelm, marble floors that echoed with their footsteps, portraits of stern-faced Ashfords gazing down from gilded frames, vases of hothouse flowers perfuming the air with almost suffocating sweetness. Everything spoke of wealth accumulated over generations, of a family whose roots ran deep into England's aristocratic soil. "Lady Catherine's apartments are in the West Wing," Mrs. Pemberton explained, as they climbed a grand staircase. "She prefers the morning light there. His Grace's rooms are in the opposite wing. He values his privacy and expects the household to respect it. You'll take your meals with Lady Catherine unless she's indisposed, in which case you'll dine in your own room. His Grace occasionally requests your presence at dinner when there are no guests, as he believes company aids his sister's recovery. Recovery. The word hung between them, unelaborated. Eleanor's room was more spacious than any she had occupied in her working life, a comfortable chamber with rose-patterned wallpaper, a writing desk positioned near the window, and a view of the gardens that stretched toward a distant lake. A connecting door led to Lady Catherine's suite. "Settle yourself," Mrs. Pemberton instructed. "Lady Catherine is resting, but will receive you at 5 o'clock for tea. His Grace is in London on business, but returns tomorrow evening. He'll want to meet you then." Left alone, Eleanor unpacked her meagre belongings with careful hands, hanging her dresses in a wardrobe that could have held 20 times as many. She washed her face in the porcelain basin, pinned her hair more neatly, and tried to calm the nervous flutter in her chest. She had been in service since she was 18, 7 years of caring for other people's children, managing other people's households, always on the periphery of lives more substantial than her own. Her father had been a country vicar, her mother a gentleman's daughter who had married for love and paid for it in genteel poverty. Both had died of influenza when Eleanor was 17, leaving her with a small inheritance that lasted exactly 6 months. She had no siblings, no relations willing to take in a penniless girl with only her education to recommend her. The agency had found her first position, governess to a merchant's daughters in Manchester, and she had moved from household to household since, always competent, always invisible. At precisely 5 o'clock, Eleanor knocked softly on the connecting door. "Enter." The voice was young, cultured, and utterly exhausted. Lady Catherine Ashford sat in a chair by the window, a book unopened in her lap. She was beautiful in the way of porcelain dolls, pale skin, golden hair arranged in soft curls, blue eyes that seemed too large for her delicate face. She wore a day dress of lavender silk that must have cost more than Eleanor earned in a year, but it hung on her frame as though she had recently lost weight. "Miss Hartley." Lady Catherine's smile was practiced, the kind Eleanor recognized from years of observing the upper classes. "How kind of you to accept this position. I'm afraid I've been rather difficult with previous companions. My brother despairs of me." Eleanor curtsied, measuring her response carefully. "I hope to prove useful to you, Lady Catherine. I understand you've recently returned from abroad." Something flickered in those pale eyes. Pain, perhaps, or memory. "Italy." "Yes. It was meant to be educational. Instead it was—" She trailed off, turning back to the window. "But we needn't speak of that. Tell me about yourself, Miss Hartley. The agency said you were a governess?" They took tea together, a ritual that felt both formal and strangely intimate. Eleanor spoke carefully about her background, omitting the loneliness, the constant awareness of her precarious position in the world. Lady Catherine listened with what seemed like genuine interest, asking questions about the families Eleanor had served, the children she had taught. "You must think us terribly frivolous," Lady Catherine said suddenly, gesturing at the opulent room. "All this wealth, all this comfort, and yet I sit here like a prisoner in a tower." "I think," Eleanor said slowly, "that unhappiness recognizes no class boundaries, my lady." Lady Catherine's eyes widened slightly, then filled with unexpected tears. "The last companion told me I should be grateful for my blessings and stop indulging in melancholy, as if gratitude could cure a broken heart." Eleanor set down her teacup. "Would you like to walk in the gardens? I noticed they're quite beautiful, and the evening is pleasant." They walked for an hour as the sun descended toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Lady Catherine spoke haltingly at first, then with increasing freedom, about her time in Italy, the art, the music, the intoxicating sense of being far from England's rigid social structures. She did not mention what had brought her home, and Eleanor did not press. When they returned to the house, Lady Catherine squeezed Eleanor's hand. "I think we shall get along very well, Miss Hartley. You don't treat me like I'm made of glass." That night, Eleanor lay in her comfortable bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a great house settling into darkness. She thought about Lady Catherine's sadness, about the Duke who would return tomorrow, about the strange fortune that had brought her to this place. Through the window, she could see stars emerging in the darkening sky, distant and cold and beautiful. She could not know that the Duke of Ashford was, at that very moment, sitting in his London study, reviewing the agency's report on Miss Eleanor Hartley with unusual attention, that he had read her references 3 times, noting the consistent praise for her intelligence, her discretion, her gentle manner with those in her care, that he had specifically requested someone young enough to be a companion rather than a nurse, someone who might draw his sister back into engagement with life. Nor could she know that when he had seen the small portrait the agency provided, a simple sketch showing a young woman with serious eyes and an unadorned beauty, he had felt an unexpected stirring of interest that he immediately dismissed as inappropriate. She was an employee, his sister's companion, nothing more. But as he prepared for bed in his London townhouse, Alexander Ashford, Duke of Ashford, found his thoughts returning to that sketch, to the intelligence evident in those grey eyes, to the mystery of what circumstances had reduced a vicar's daughter to a life of service. He told himself his interest was merely practical. He needed to ensure his sister's companion was suitable. He told himself this, and almost believed it. The next evening, as his coach rolled through the gates of Ashford Hall, Alexander felt an anticipation he had not experienced in years. The house blazed with light, welcoming him home. Mrs. Pemberton met him in the entrance hall with her usual efficiency. "Lady Catherine seems brighter, Your Grace. Miss Hartley has a calming effect on her." "Excellent. I'll change for dinner and meet them in the drawing-room at 8. Udi." In his chambers, Alexander's valet helped him into evening dress while providing a detailed account of household matters. But Alexander's mind was elsewhere, already composing the questions he would ask Miss Hartley, already curious about the woman who had, in just 2 days, accomplished what months of previous companions had not. When he entered the drawing-room at precisely 8 o'clock, he found his sister seated at the piano, her fingers moving tentatively over the keys, the first time she had played since returning from Italy, and beside her, turning the pages of the music, stood Miss Eleanor Hartley. She was not beautiful in the conventional sense, Alexander thought. Her features were too strong, her manner too composed. But when she looked up at his entrance, when their eyes met across the candlelit room, he felt something shift in his carefully ordered world, a hairline crack in the armor he had built around his heart. "Your Grace." She curtsied with perfect propriety, her grey dress simple but well-fitted, her chestnut hair arranged in a style that was neither fashionable nor plain. "Welcome home, Miss Hartley." His voice sounded strange to his own ears, too formal. "I trust my sister has made you welcome. She has been most kind." Catherine rose from the piano, her face more animated than he had seen it in months. "Alexander, Miss Hartley has been teaching me a new piece, Beethoven. She plays beautifully herself, though she's too modest to admit it." Dinner was a revelation. With Miss Hartley present, Catherine actually participated in conversation, discussing books she had been reading, asking Alexander about his business in London. Miss Hartley herself spoke little, but when she did, her observations were intelligent and surprisingly well-informed. She had, Alexander discovered, read widely despite her limited circumstances: philosophy, history, literature. "You have strong opinions on the Reform Act, Miss Hartley," he observed, intrigued by her analysis of the recent political upheaval. "I have opinions, Your Grace. Whether they are strong or merely uninformed, I leave to others to judge." Her smile was slight, self-deprecating. A governess has considerable time for reading, and newspapers are often left about. "And what do you think of Wordsworth's latest collection?" Her eyes lit with genuine enthusiasm. "I think he has lost some of the revolutionary spirit of his youth, but gained a depth of reflection that is perhaps more valuable. Though I confess I prefer his earlier work." There was a wildness to it that spoke to something in my own nature. Alexander found himself leaning forward, fascinated. "You have a wild nature, Miss Hartley. I would not have guessed it from your demeanor." "We all contain multitudes, Your Grace. Society merely requires that some of us conceal them more thoroughly than others." The evening passed with unexpected swiftness. When Catherine retired at 10, pleading fatigue, Alexander found himself reluctant to let Miss Hartley withdraw as well. "A moment, Miss Hartley, if you please." She turned, her expression carefully neutral. "Of course, Your Grace. I wanted to thank you. My sister seems lighter. Whatever you've done in these 2 days, it's more than anyone else has managed in months." "I've done very little, Your Grace. Perhaps I simply arrived at the right moment. Or perhaps you possess a gift for understanding troubled hearts." He paused, aware that he was treading into dangerous territory. "The agency mentioned you lost your parents young. Forgive me if the question is impertinent, but do you find that grief ever truly heals, or does one merely learn to carry it more gracefully?" Eleanor's composure wavered for just a moment, revealing something raw beneath. "I think, Your Grace, that grief transforms us. We are never again the people we were before loss, but we can become people who understand the fragility of happiness, and perhaps that understanding makes us more capable of cherishing it when it appears." Their eyes held for a moment too long. Alexander felt his pulse quicken, felt the dangerous pull of attraction that he knew he must not acknowledge. She was his employee, his sister's companion. To pursue any personal interest would be an abuse of his position, a betrayal of the trust she had placed in his household. "Thank you, Miss Hartley. That will be all." She curtsied and withdrew, leaving him alone in the drawing-room with his thoughts and a growing sense that his carefully controlled life was about to become considerably more complicated. In her room, Eleanor pressed her hands to her flushed cheeks, her heart racing. She had not expected the Duke to be so young, so handsome, so genuinely intelligent. She had not expected to feel anything beyond professional respect. But when he had looked at her with those dark eyes, when he had asked about grief with such evident personal understanding, she had felt something dangerous stir within her, a longing she had thought she had trained herself to suppress. She was a paid companion. He was a duke. The distance between them was not merely social, but absolute, unbridgeable. To entertain any romantic notion would be not just foolish, but potentially catastrophic for her livelihood. And yet, as she prepared for bed, she could not stop replaying their conversation, could not stop remembering the way his voice had softened when he spoke of his sister's suffering, the intelligence that animated his features, the sense that beneath his aristocratic reserve lay depths she longed to explore. Outside, the moon rose over Ashford Hall, silvering the gardens and the distant lake. In separate wings of the great house, the Duke and his sister's companion lay awake, each troubled by thoughts they knew they should not entertain, each aware that something had shifted in the careful balance of their world. The golden cage of Ashford Hall had opened its door. Neither of them yet understood that stepping through it would require more courage than either had ever needed before. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that felt both comfortable and precarious. Eleanor rose each morning to find Lady Catherine already awake, eager for their walks through the gardens or their discussions of literature and art. The young woman's spirits improved visibly. Colour returned to her cheeks. Her laughter rang through the corridors, and she began to speak, haltingly at first, about what had happened in Italy. There had been a man, of course, a painter named Lorenzo, whose talent had been matched only by his capacity for deception. He had courted Catherine with passionate intensity, speaking of love and art, and a life lived beyond the constraints of English propriety. She had believed him, had even contemplated defying her brother to remain in Italy as Lorenzo's wife. Then she had discovered he was already married, that his declarations of love had been calculated seductions designed to compromise her into becoming his mistress, or worse, to extract money from her wealthy family. "Alexander came for me," Catherine told Eleanor one afternoon as they sat by the lake, watching swans glide across the mirror-smooth water. "He travelled to Florence himself, dealt with Lorenzo, brought me home. He never once said, 'I told you so,' though he had warned me about trusting strangers. He simply held me while I wept and promised that the pain would fade." Eleanor's heart ached for both siblings, for Catherine's shattered innocence, for the Duke's evident devotion to his sister. She saw Alexander rarely during those first weeks. He was often in London on business, or closeted in his study, managing the vast Ashford estates. But when they did encounter each other, at dinner in the library during Catherine's music lessons, Eleanor felt the same dangerous current of attraction, the same sense that they were both carefully not acknowledging something that grew stronger with each passing day. He was unfailingly courteous, never overstepping the bounds of propriety. Yet sometimes she would look up from a book to find his eyes on her dark and intense, before he quickly looked away. Sometimes their hands would brush as they both reached for the same volume in the library, and the contact would send electricity racing through her veins. Sometimes, during dinner conversations, they would fall into debates about philosophy or politics that left Catherine laughing and accusing them of forgetting her presence entirely. "You two are perfectly matched in stubbornness," Catherine teased one evening after a particularly spirited discussion about the role of government in social welfare. "Neither of you will concede a point, even when you're clearly wrong." "I am never clearly wrong," Alexander said with mock severity. "Miss Hartley, however, is occasionally mistaken, though she argues her errors with admirable conviction." "Your Grace mistakes confidence for correctness," Eleanor replied, unable to suppress her smile. "A common failing among those accustomed to deference." Catherine clapped her hands in delight. "Oh, Alexander, she's put you in your place. I do like her." But it was the small private moments that Eleanor treasured most dangerously. The evening she found Alexander in the music room, playing the piano with surprising skill, his fingers moving over the keys with the same decisive grace he brought to everything. He had not noticed her in the doorway, and she had stood transfixed, watching the candlelight play across his features, softening the aristocratic severity into something almost vulnerable. When he finally looked up and saw her, neither spoke for a long moment. "I didn't mean to intrude," Eleanor said finally. "You're not intruding. I was merely thinking. The music is beautiful. Chopin? You recognize it. Yes, the Nocturne in E-flat major. My mother used to play it." His expression grew distant. "She died when Catherine was 10. I was 20. Sometimes I play her favorite pieces and imagine she's listening." Eleanor moved into the room, drawn by the raw honesty in his voice. "You must have been very young to shoulder such responsibility. Too young, perhaps. My father died 3 years later, and suddenly I was Duke, responsible for Catherine, for the estates, for hundreds of people whose livelihoods depended on Ashford prosperity. I had no time to grieve, no time to be uncertain. I simply had to be adequate to the task." "I think you've been more than adequate, Your Grace." He looked at her then, with such intensity that her breath caught. "Do you know what I admire most about you, Miss Hartley?" She should stop this conversation, should retreat to the safety of formality. Instead, she whispered, "What?" "Your honesty. You don't flatter or dissemble. When you speak, I trust that you mean what you say. It's a rare quality in my world, where everyone wants something, and most people will say anything to get it. Perhaps I simply lack the sophistication to lie convincingly. No." He stood, moving closer, though still maintaining proper distance. "You choose honesty even when deception would serve you better. It's a form of courage." The air between them felt charged, dangerous. Eleanor knew she should leave, knew that this intimacy was crossing invisible lines that once crossed could not be uncrossed. But she remained, held by his gaze, by the terrible hope that perhaps the distance between them was not as unbridgeable as she had believed. Eleanor. Her name on his lips was a revelation, an intimacy that made her heart race. We should not." Whatever he might have said was interrupted by Catherine's voice calling from the corridor. "Alexander, are you in there? Lord Pemberton has arrived with his family. They're in the drawing room." The spell broke. Alexander stepped back, his expression closing into formal courtesy. "Thank you for your company, Miss Hartley. We should join my sister." The moment was gone, but its echo lingered in Eleanor's heart, like a promise or a warning. Lord Pemberton was an old family friend, a jovial man in his 50s who had brought his wife and 2 daughters for an impromptu visit. Over dinner, Eleanor learned that the Pembertons' estate bordered Ashford lands, that the families had been connected for generations. Lady Pemberton was a handsome woman with shrewd eyes that assessed Eleanor with barely concealed curiosity. "A companion for dear Catherine. How thoughtful, Your Grace," Lady Pemberton said, her tone suggesting anything but approval. "Though Catherine seems quite recovered, perhaps she no longer requires such constant attendance." "Miss Hartley has been invaluable," Catherine said firmly. "I don't know what I would do without her." The Pemberton daughters, Arabella and Sophia, were pretty girls in their late teens, clearly angling for Alexander's attention with practiced flirtation. Eleanor watched with a mixture of amusement and something darker as they competed for his notice, batting their eyelashes and laughing too loudly at his polite remarks. "Your Grace, you simply must attend our summer ball," Arabella gushed. "It's to be the event of the season. Everyone who matters will be there, and you've been such a hermit lately." "I've been occupied with estate business," Alexander replied neutrally. "All work and no play makes for a dull duke," Sophia added with a giggle. "Surely you can spare one evening for pleasure." Lady Pemberton leaned forward. "It would mean so much to the girls, Your Grace, and it would be an excellent opportunity for dear Catherine to re-enter society. She cannot hide away forever." Eleanor saw Catherine stiffen, saw the anxiety flash across her face. Before she could think better of it, she spoke. "Perhaps Lady Catherine should decide for herself when she's ready for such events." The table fell silent. Lady Pemberton's eyes narrowed. "I beg your pardon, Miss Hartley, and I merely meant that Lady Catherine's recovery should proceed at her own pace, not according to society's schedule." "How extraordinary," Lady Pemberton said coldly. "A companion with opinions on social matters. Your Grace, I hope you don't allow your servants to speak out of turn at table." Eleanor felt her face flush with humiliation, but before she could apologize, Alexander's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Miss Hartley is not a servant, Lady Pemberton. She is my sister's companion and a valued member of this household. Her observations are both welcome and, in this case, entirely correct. Catherine will return to society when she chooses, not when others deem it convenient." Lady Pemberton's smile was glacial. "Of course, Your Grace, I meant no offense. But the damage was done." For the rest of the evening, Eleanor felt the weight of Lady Pemberton's disapproval, the speculative glances of her daughters, the subtle shift in atmosphere. She had overstepped, had forgotten her place, and now everyone knew it. When the Pembertons finally departed, Catherine squeezed Eleanor's hand. "Thank you for defending me. Lady Pemberton has always been dreadful. She's been trying to marry one of her daughters to Alexander for years." But Alexander's expression was troubled. "Miss Hartley, a word in my study, please." Eleanor followed him with a sinking heart, certain she was about to be dismissed. The study was a masculine room, all dark wood and leather, lined with books and maps. Alexander closed the door and turned to face her. "I apologize for Lady Pemberton's rudeness." "Your Grace, I'm the one who should apologize. I spoke out of turn. It won't happen again." "That's not—" He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Eleanor, you did nothing wrong. But I need you to understand something. People like Lady Pemberton are watching for any irregularity, any hint of impropriety. They see a young, intelligent woman in my household, and they speculate. They gossip, and gossip can be more destructive than any truth." "I understand, Your Grace. I'll be more careful to remember my position." "Damn your position!" The outburst shocked them both. Alexander took a breath, visibly controlling himself. "Forgive me, but I'm tired of positions and propriety and all the rules that keep people in boxes. You're worth 10 of Arabella Pemberton, with her simpering and her calculated charm. You have more intelligence in your smallest finger than most of the women I'm expected to court, and yet society says I should marry someone like her and treat someone like you as invisible." Eleanor's heart was pounding so hard she thought he must hear it. "Your Grace, you're speaking dangerously." "I know." He moved closer, his eyes searching hers. "I know I shouldn't say these things. I know there's an impossible distance between us. But Eleanor, I can't stop thinking about you. I can't stop wanting to hear your thoughts, to see your smile, to know everything about you. Tell me I'm alone in this. Tell me you feel nothing, and I'll never speak of it again." She should lie. She should protect them both with a well-placed falsehood. But he had asked for honesty, and she could not deny him. "I can't tell you that," she whispered, "because it wouldn't be true." The confession hung between them, irrevocable. Alexander closed the remaining distance, his hand rising to cup her cheek with infinite gentleness. "Then we are both in trouble," he murmured. He kissed her then, softly at first, then with growing passion as she responded, her hands clutching his shoulders, her entire world narrowing to the sensation of his lips on hers, the strength of his arms around her, the rightness of being held by him. It was her first kiss, and it felt like coming home and leaping off a cliff simultaneously, terrifying and perfect and utterly inevitable. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, reality crashed back in. "We can't," Eleanor said, though her hands still rested on his chest. "Your Grace, Alexander, this is impossible." "Nothing is impossible. You're a duke. I'm a paid companion. The world doesn't allow for this." "Then perhaps the world needs to change." "You can't change the world through force of will. No matter how powerful you are, there are rules, expectations. Your sister needs me. Your reputation, my reputation can withstand anything. Eleanor, I'm not suggesting something illicit. I'm suggesting—" He paused, seeming to realize the enormity of what he was about to say. "I'm suggesting that perhaps we could find a way forward, together." Before Eleanor could respond, before she could process what he might mean, a knock sounded at the door. They sprang apart as Mrs. Pemberton entered, her expression carefully neutral in a way that suggested she had seen more than she should. "Forgive the interruption, Your Grace, but Lord Ashford's solicitor has arrived from London with urgent documents requiring your attention." "Thank you, Mrs. Pemberton. I'll be there momentarily." The housekeeper withdrew, but the spell was broken. Eleanor moved toward the door, needing distance, needing time to think. "Eleanor, wait! I should check on Lady Catherine. Good night, Your Grace." She fled before he could stop her, her mind reeling, her lips still burning from his kiss. In her room, she pressed her hands to her face, trying to calm her racing heart. What had she done? What had they done? She had allowed herself to hope, and hope was the most dangerous thing of all. The next morning brought news that would shatter that hope entirely. A letter arrived for Alexander during breakfast, delivered by special messenger. Eleanor watched his face darken as he read, saw his jaw clench with barely controlled fury. "What is it?" Catherine asked, alarmed. "Lady Pemberton has been busy." His voice was ice. "She's apparently shared her observations about our household with half the county. According to my solicitor, there are rumours circulating that I've installed a mistress at Ashford Hall under the guise of hiring a companion for you." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. Catherine gasped. "That's monstrous! How dare she?" "She dares because she can, because society loves scandal and is always ready to believe the worst." Alexander looked at Eleanor, his expression anguished. "I'm so sorry. This is my fault. I should have been more careful." "What will you do?" Catherine demanded. "I'll handle it. But Eleanor, Miss Hartley, I think it would be best if you remained at the house for the time being. Don't give the gossips any more ammunition." Eleanor nodded numbly, understanding what he wasn't saying. The kiss, the confession, it had all been a mistake. Reality had reasserted itself with brutal efficiency. But worse was yet to come. That afternoon, a carriage arrived bearing Lord Edmund Stirling, a distant cousin of the Ashfords, and a man whose ambitions had always exceeded his means. He was handsome in a cold way, with pale blue eyes and a smile that never reached them. Eleanor disliked him on sight. "Alexander, my dear cousin," Edmund said, embracing the Duke with false warmth. "I came as soon as I heard the distressing rumours. Naturally, I knew they must be false, but I thought you might need support from family during this trying time." "How thoughtful," Alexander said dryly, "though I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs." Of course. Still, one must be careful. Reputations are fragile things, especially for someone in your position. Speaking of which, his eyes found Eleanor, and his smile sharpened. "This must be the infamous Miss Hartley. My dear, you've caused quite a stir." "Lord Stirling." Eleanor curtsied, her skin crawling under his appraising gaze. "Charming, quite charming. I can see why Alexander is so protective of you." The insinuation was clear. Alexander's voice turned dangerous. "Edmund, I suggest you choose your next words very carefully." "No offence intended, cousin. I merely think that perhaps Miss Hartley's position here has become untenable. For her own sake, of course. The gossip will only grow worse. Unless—" he paused dramatically, "unless you were to make some sort of public gesture to quash the rumours. Perhaps an engagement announcement? I hear the Pemberton girl is quite eager." Eleanor felt as though she'd been struck. Of course, that was the solution society would demand. Alexander must marry someone appropriate, someone whose position would make the rumours about Eleanor seem absurd by comparison. "I have no intention of marrying Arabella Pemberton or anyone else to satisfy gossips," Alexander said coldly. "Then what do you intend? Because I assure you, this scandal will not simply disappear. Already there are whispers that you've lost your moral compass, that you're unfit to hold your position. The family name is being dragged through the mud. The family name will survive. Will it? Will Miss Hartley? Because I can promise you, Alexander, if you don't act decisively, she will be destroyed. No respectable household will employ her. She'll be marked as a woman of questionable virtue, and that stain never washes away." Eleanor saw the truth of it in Alexander's stricken expression. Edmund was right. By allowing herself to care for Alexander, by allowing him to care for her, she had set in motion her own ruin. "There is, of course, another solution," Edmund continued smoothly. "I could marry her." The room fell silent. Eleanor stared at him in horror. "You're mad," Alexander said flatly. "Am I? Think about it, cousin. If Miss Hartley were to become my wife, the rumours would be explained away. She was here as Catherine's companion. I visited. We fell in love. You gave your blessing. Your reputation is preserved, her reputation is preserved, and I gain a wife who is, I must admit, far more interesting than the usual society offerings." "No," Eleanor said, finding her voice. "Absolutely not." Edmund turned to her with mock sympathy. "My dear, I understand this is sudden, but what are your alternatives? Return to being a governess, always under suspicion, or accept my offer and become Lady Stirling, with all the security and respect that title provides." "I would rather starve." "How romantic, but impractical. Alexander, surely you see the wisdom of this solution. You care for Miss Hartley's welfare, don't you? This is the only way to protect her." Alexander looked at Eleanor, his expression tortured. She could see him calculating, weighing options, trying to find another way. But there was no other way. Society had made its judgment, and they were both trapped by it. "I need time to think," Alexander said finally. "Of course, I'll return tomorrow for your answer. Miss Hartley, I look forward to knowing you better." Edmund bowed and departed, leaving devastation in his wake. Catherine was crying. "This is my fault. If I hadn't needed a companion, if I hadn't been so weak." "This is no one's fault but Lady Pemberton's," Alexander said harshly, "and society's, for its cruel and arbitrary rules." Eleanor stood, her decision made. "I'll leave. Tonight. If I'm gone, the rumours will die down. You can say you dismissed me when you learned of the gossip. Your reputation will be intact. No, Alexander's voice was anguished. Eleanor, I won't let you be driven away like this. You don't have a choice. Neither of us does. She looked at him, memorizing his face, knowing this was goodbye. Thank you for these weeks. They were the happiest of my life, but they were a dream, and now we have to wake up. She turned and walked from the room before her composure could shatter, before she could see the pain in his eyes and lose her resolve. In her chamber, she packed her trunk with shaking hands, tears streaming down her face. She had been a fool to hope. The golden cage had closed around her after all, and this time there was no escape. Eleanor did not leave that night. Alexander found her in her room, her trunk half-packed, her face streaked with tears, and simply said, "Please, give me a chance to make this right." She should have refused. She should have been strong enough to walk away, but the desperation in his voice, the plea in his eyes, made her weak. She nodded, and he left before either of them could say something that would make the situation even more impossible. The next morning brought Edmund Sterling back to Ashford Hall, his expression confident, clearly expecting capitulation. Instead, Alexander met him in the entrance hall with cold fury. "Your offer is declined, Edmund. Miss Hartley will not be marrying you or anyone else under duress." Edmund's smile thinned. "Then you condemn her to ruin. How noble of you, cousin. What I condemn is your opportunistic attempt to exploit a difficult situation. Miss Hartley will be leaving Ashford Hall, but not in disgrace. I'm sending her to London, to my aunt, Lady Thornbury. She'll serve as companion to my aunt, who has been requesting assistance for some time. A perfectly respectable position with an impeccable reference. It was a masterful stroke. Lady Thornbury was Alexander's father's sister, a formidable widow who commanded respect throughout society. Her endorsement would shield Eleanor from the worst of the gossip. Edmund's eyes narrowed. "Your aunt is a dragon who terrifies half of London. You're subjecting Miss Hartley to that? I'm offering her protection and a fresh start. The choice, of course, is hers." Both men turned to Eleanor, who had been standing silently in the doorway. She understood what Alexander was offering, not just a position, but distance. Space for the scandal to die down, for both of them to regain their equilibrium. It was the sensible solution, the only solution that didn't end in complete disaster. "I accept, Your Grace. Thank you for your generosity." Edmund's expression darkened. "You're making a mistake, cousin. Both of you. This isn't over." "Yes, Edmund, it is. Good day." After Edmund departed, radiating barely suppressed rage, Catherine threw her arms around Eleanor. "You're not leaving forever, are you? Promise me you'll come back." "I don't know what the future holds, my lady. But I'll write to you, I promise." Alexander arranged everything with characteristic efficiency. Within 2 days, Eleanor was on a coach to London, her trunk secured, a letter of introduction to Lady Thornbury in her reticule. Alexander had wanted to accompany her, but they both knew that would only fuel more gossip. Instead, they said goodbye in his study, with Mrs. Pemberton discreetly stationed outside the door. "I don't know how to thank you," Eleanor said, her voice unsteady. "Don't thank me. This is my fault. I should have been more careful, should have protected you better. You couldn't have known Lady Pemberton would be so vindictive. I should have anticipated it. People like her always strike when they sense vulnerability." He took her hand, a gesture that was both too much and not nearly enough. "Eleanor, when this dies down, when enough time has passed—" "Don't," she interrupted gently. "Don't make promises we can't keep. You're a duke. You need to marry someone appropriate, someone who can give you heirs and manage your social obligations. I'm a vicar's daughter with no fortune and a scandal attached to my name. The mathematics of it are quite simple. I don't care about mathematics, but you should. You have responsibilities to your sister, to your estates, to your family name. I won't be the reason you fail to meet them." He pulled her close then, holding her as though he could keep her through sheer force of will. "I'm not giving up on this. On us!" She allowed herself one moment to rest against him, to memorize the feeling of being in his arms, the scent of his cologne, the steady beat of his heart. Then she stepped back. "Goodbye, Alexander. Not goodbye, never goodbye, just until we meet again." The journey to London took a full day. Eleanor watched the countryside give way to increasingly dense settlements, then to the sprawling chaos of the city itself. She had been to London only once before, as a child, and had found it overwhelming. Now, arriving at Lady Thornbury's townhouse in Mayfair as dusk fell, she felt that same sense of being swallowed by something vast and indifferent. The townhouse was elegant but not ostentatious, a four-story building of pale stone with black iron railings. A butler with a face like carved granite admitted her and led her to a drawing room where Lady Thornbury awaited. Alexander's aunt was perhaps 65, with silver hair arranged in an elaborate style that had been fashionable 30 years ago, and which she apparently saw no reason to change. She wore black silk. She had been widowed for 2 decades and seemed to have adopted mourning as a permanent state, and her eyes were the same dark, intelligent eyes as her nephew's. "So, you're the girl who's caused such a commotion," Lady Thornbury said without preamble. "Sit down, child. Let me look at you properly." Eleanor sat, submitting to an inspection that felt more thorough than any she had endured. Not a beauty, but handsome enough. Good bones, intelligent eyes. "I can see why Alexander is smitten." She held up a hand as Eleanor started to protest. "Don't bother denying it. My nephew wrote me a letter that was quite revealing in what it didn't say. He's in love with you, poor fool, and you with him, unless I miss my guess." Eleanor felt her face flush. "Lady Thornbury, I assure you—" "Oh, stop assuring me of things we both know are false. I'm too old for polite fictions. The question is what we're going to do about it. There's nothing to be done. The situation is impossible." Impossible is just another word for difficult. I've lived through impossible situations before. I married a man my family despised, and we had 30 happy years together before he died. Society forgave us eventually. Society always does, if you give it enough time and don't show weakness. Your situation was different. You were the daughter of a duke, not a paid companion. True. But you're not just a paid companion, are you? You're an educated woman of good family who has fallen on hard times through no fault of her own. That's quite different from being a fortune hunter or an adventuress. The distinction matters. Lady Thornbury rose and moved to the window, looking out at the gaslit street. "Here's what's going to happen, Miss Hartley. You're going to stay with me as my companion. You're going to accompany me to social events. I still attend a select few despite my age. You're going to be seen as a respectable young woman under my protection. And you're going to give Alexander time to manage the situation at his end. Manage it how? That's for him to determine. But my nephew is not a man who accepts defeat easily. If he wants you, and he clearly does, he'll find a way. Your job is to be patient and to maintain your dignity. Can you do that?" Eleanor thought about it, about the alternative of fleeing London entirely, of trying to find another position under a cloud of scandal. "Yes, my lady, I can do that." "Good. Now let's discuss your wardrobe. That dress is serviceable but dreadfully dull. If you're to be seen with me, you'll need better clothes." "Don't argue. I have more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. And no one to leave it to except Alexander, who has quite enough of his own. Consider it an investment in your future." Over the following weeks, Eleanor discovered that Lady Thornbury was unlike anyone she had ever met. The old woman was sharp-tongued, fiercely intelligent, and utterly indifferent to social conventions she deemed stupid. She had been a blue-stocking in her youth, scandalizing society by attending scientific lectures and publishing essays on political economy under a male pseudonym. "I was born too early," Lady Thornbury said one afternoon as they took tea in her private sitting room. "If I were young now, I might have been able to do something significant with my mind. Instead, I had to content myself with being a wealthy man's eccentric wife. But you, Miss Hartley, You're living in a time when things are beginning to change. Slowly, glacially slowly, but changing nonetheless. It doesn't feel like change from where I'm standing, my lady. That's because you're in the middle of it. But trust me, the world you'll inhabit at 40 will be quite different from the world you knew at 20. The question is whether you'll have the courage to help shape that change, or simply be swept along by it. Lady Thornbury began taking Eleanor to carefully selected social events, a lecture at the Royal Society, a poetry reading at a fashionable salon, a charity concert for the benefit of orphans. At each event, she introduced Eleanor simply as my companion, Miss Hartley, a young woman of excellent family and considerable intelligence. The gossip from Hampshire had reached London, of course, but Lady Thornbury's endorsement created confusion. If the scandalous Miss Hartley was being sponsored by the formidable Lady Thornbury, perhaps the rumours had been exaggerated. Perhaps there was more to the story than malicious tongues suggested. It was at one of these events, a lecture on the new science of geology at the Royal Institution, that Eleanor met Dr. James Whitmore. He was perhaps 35, with sandy hair and kind grey eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He was a physician who had recently returned from several years working in India, and he approached Eleanor during the interval with genuine interest in her thoughts on the lecture. "You seemed quite engaged with Professor Lyell's theories," he said. "Do you have an interest in natural philosophy?" "I find it fascinating," Eleanor admitted. "The idea that the Earth is so much older than we thought, that it's been shaped by gradual processes over immense periods of time. It changes everything, doesn't it? Our sense of our place in creation, our understanding of time itself." Dr. Whitmore's face lit up. "Exactly. You've grasped the philosophical implications immediately. Most people simply find it disturbing and refuse to think about it further." They talked for 20 minutes, ranging over topics from geology to medicine to the social reforms Dr. Whitmore was passionate about, improving sanitation in London's slums, establishing free clinics for the poor. Eleanor found him intelligent, earnest, and refreshingly unpretentious. When he asked permission to call on Lady Thornbury, and by extension on Eleanor, she found herself agreeing. Lady Thornbury watched this interaction with shrewd eyes. Later, in the carriage home, she said, "Doctor, Whitmore is a good man, respected in his field, financially secure, socially acceptable. He would make an excellent husband for a woman in your position." Eleanor's heart sank. "My lady, I'm not looking for a husband." "Perhaps not, but you should be. Alexander is doing his best to manage the situation in Hampshire, but these things take time. Meanwhile, you're young and intelligent and deserve a life of your own. Dr. Whitmore clearly admires you. Would it be so terrible to consider the possibility? I don't love him. Love can grow. I loved my husband deeply, but it wasn't love at first sight. It was respect and liking that deepened into love over time. That's a perfectly valid foundation for marriage." Eleanor said nothing, but her heart rebelled against the idea. She didn't want respect and liking that might grow into love. She wanted the fierce, immediate, impossible thing she felt for Alexander, the sense that he saw her completely, understood her entirely, valued her exactly as she was. But perhaps that was childish. Perhaps Lady Thornbury was right, and she needed to be practical. Dr. Whitmore did call, and then called again. He brought Eleanor books he thought she might enjoy, engaged her in stimulating conversations, treated her with unfailing courtesy and respect. Lady Thornbury encouraged the connection, inviting him to dinner, arranging for him to escort them to various events. "He's courting you, you know," Lady Thornbury said after Dr. Whitmore's 4th visit, "quite properly and respectfully, but courting nonetheless." "I know," Eleanor said quietly. And I don't know what to do. He's everything I should want, kind, intelligent, principled. But when I'm with him, I don't feel what I felt with—" She stopped, unable to finish. "With Alexander. Yes, I know. But my dear, that intensity you felt with my nephew, it's partly because the situation was impossible, forbidden. It's the romance of star-crossed lovers. Real life, real marriage is about partnership and respect and shared values. Dr. Whitmore offers you all of that. Is that what you had with your husband? Partnership and respect? Lady Thornbury's expression softened. I had that and more. But we were fortunate. We were also of the same social class, which made everything easier. You and Alexander, the obstacles are real, Eleanor. Even if he were to marry you, you would face a lifetime of whispers, of people questioning your motives, of never quite being accepted. Is that what you want? Eleanor didn't answer because she didn't know. All she knew was that her heart ached for Alexander, that she dreamed of him every night, that Dr. Whitmore's kindness, however genuine, felt like a pale shadow of what she had briefly known. Letters arrived from Catherine weekly, full of news from Ashford Hall. Alexander had hosted a large house party, inviting several eligible young ladies and their families, clearly making a show of considering marriage prospects to quell the gossip. Catherine wrote that he was miserable, going through the motions of courtship without any genuine interest, but that the strategy seemed to be working. The scandal was fading, replaced by speculation about which lady would capture the Duke's heart. "He's doing this for you," Lady Thornbury said when Eleanor shared this news. "He's trying to rehabilitate both your reputations by appearing to move on. It's actually quite clever." But it felt like a knife to Eleanor's heart. She tried to be happy that the plan was working, tried to tell herself that Alexander finding a suitable wife was the best outcome for everyone. She tried to open her heart to Dr. Whitmore's courtship, to imagine a future as his wife, working alongside him in his charitable endeavors, building a life of purpose and meaning. She tried and failed. 3 months after arriving in London, Eleanor received an unexpected visitor. She was in Lady Thornbury's library, cataloguing a new shipment of books, when the butler announced, "The Duke of Ashford, miss." Her heart stopped. She turned to find Alexander in the doorway, looking travel-worn and more handsome than she remembered. For a moment neither spoke, the air between them electric with everything unsaid. "Eleanor." Her name was a prayer on his lips. "Your Grace, this is unexpected. I had business in London. I thought I should call on my aunt, see how you're settling in." It was a lie, and they both knew it. He had come to see her, propriety be damned. Lady Thornbury appeared in the doorway, her expression knowing. "Alexander, how delightful. You'll stay for tea, of course. Miss Hartley, why don't you show my nephew the new conservatory? I've had it completely redone, and I'd value his opinion." It was a transparent excuse to give them privacy, but Eleanor was grateful for it. She led Alexander through the house to the conservatory, a glass-roofed room filled with exotic plants and the sound of a small fountain. The moment they were alone, Alexander pulled her into his arms. "God, I've missed you," he murmured against her hair. "Every day has been torture." "Alexander, we shouldn't—" I know all the reasons we shouldn't. But Eleanor, I can't do this. I can't pretend to court other women when you're the only one I want. I can't imagine a future that doesn't have you in it." "What are you saying?" He pulled back, his hands framing her face. "I'm saying that I don't care about scandal or society or any of it. I'm saying that I want to marry you, if you'll have me. I know it will be difficult. I know there will be people who disapprove, who whisper behind their hands. But I also know that a life without you isn't worth living." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "You can't mean that. You have responsibilities, which I can fulfill with you at my side. Eleanor, you're intelligent, compassionate, strong. You'd be an excellent duchess. Better than any of the vapid society girls I'm supposed to consider. Catherine adores you. She's written me a dozen letters begging me to find a way to bring you back. She says you're the sister she always wanted. But the scandal is already fading, and my aunt's sponsorship has done wonders for your reputation. If we wait a few more months, if we court properly and publicly, society will accept it. They may not like it, but they'll accept it." Eleanor wanted to believe him. She wanted it so desperately that it frightened her. "There's something you should know. Dr. Whitmore has been calling on me. Your aunt thinks he intends to propose." She felt Alexander stiffen. Dr. Whitmore, the physician. Yes, he's a good man, Alexander. Kind and intelligent, and do you love him? No, but your aunt says love can grow, that respect and shared values are a better foundation than passion. My aunt is wrong. His voice was fierce. Eleanor, look at me. Do you love me? She met his eyes, those dark, intense eyes that saw straight through to her soul. Yes, God help me, yes. Then marry me. Not Dr. Whitmore, not anyone else, me. I know I'm asking you to take a risk, to face difficulties you shouldn't have to face. But I promise you, I will spend every day of my life making sure you never regret it. Before Eleanor could answer, before she could voice all her fears and doubts, he kissed her with a desperation that matched her own. And in that kiss, she found her answer. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Eleanor whispered, "Yes, yes, I'll marry you." The joy that transformed Alexander's face was worth every risk, every potential hardship. He kissed her again, softer this time, reverent, as though she were something precious and fragile. "I'll do this properly," he promised. "I'll court you publicly, give society time to adjust to the idea. We'll announce the engagement in 6 months, marry in a year. By then the scandal will be ancient history. And if it's not, if people never accept me, then we'll face it together. Eleanor, I'm not afraid of society's judgment. The only thing I'm afraid of is losing you." They returned to the drawing room to find Lady Thornbury waiting with a knowing smile. "I take it you've resolved your difficulties." "Aunt Agatha, I'd like your blessing to court Miss Hartley with the intention of marriage. About time. You've been moping about like a lovesick boy for months. Yes, you have my blessing and my support, though I expect you to do this properly, Alexander. No more scandals." "No more scandals," he agreed. "Just a duke courting the woman he loves with all the propriety society could demand." Lady Thornbury raised her teacup in a toast. "To propriety, then, and to love, which is far more important." As Eleanor sat beside Alexander, his hand clasping hers beneath the table where no one could see, she felt hope bloom in her chest for the first time in months. The path ahead would not be easy. There would be obstacles, disapproval, moments of doubt, but they would face it together, and that made all the difference. The golden cage had opened after all. Now she just had to be brave enough to fly. The courtship began with calculated precision. Alexander returned to Hampshire to settle his affairs and prepare society for what was to come. He wrote to Eleanor daily, long, passionate letters that she read by candlelight, pressing them to her heart like talismans against doubt. In them, he shared his plans, his hopes, his determination to make their union acceptable to even the most critical observers. "I've begun by making it known that you are under my aunt's protection," he wrote in one letter. "That you come from an excellent family fallen on hard times, that your education and character are beyond reproach. I've also let it slip that Dr. Whitmore has been courting you. Nothing creates desirability like competition. If society believes you have other respectable options, they'll be more inclined to accept our match as legitimate rather than scandalous." It was manipulative, Eleanor thought, but also brilliant. Alexander understood the social machinery better than she ever could, knew which levers to pull to shift opinion in their favor. Dr. Whitmore did indeed propose one afternoon in Lady Thornbury's drawing room. He was earnest and kind, speaking of his admiration for Eleanor's mind and character, of the life they could build together in service to others. Eleanor refused him as gently as she could, explaining that her heart was engaged elsewhere. "The Duke of Ashford," Dr. Whitmore said quietly. "It wasn't a question. Yes, I'm sorry. You deserve someone who can love you wholeheartedly. And you deserve happiness, Miss Hartley. I hope you find it with him, though I confess I'll always wonder what might have been." He took her hand, kissed it with old-fashioned courtesy, and departed with his dignity intact. Lady Thornbury, who had been listening from the corridor, entered with an approving nod. "Well handled. And now the word will spread that you refused a perfectly respectable proposal, which will make Alexander's courtship seem less like rescue and more like genuine preference. Very good. I didn't refuse him for strategic reasons, Eleanor protested. Of course not. But the strategic benefit remains. Now, we need to prepare you for your re-entry into Hampshire society. Alexander is hosting a summer ball at Ashford Hall, the first major social event since the scandal. You'll attend as my guest and he'll court you publicly. It will be your debut as a woman of consequence rather than a paid companion. The prospect terrified Eleanor. What if people are cruel? What if they refuse to accept me? Some will be cruel, some will refuse, but others will be curious, and curiosity can be cultivated into acceptance. You'll have Alexander's support, my sponsorship, and Catherine's friendship. That's a formidable alliance. The rest is up to you. You must be gracious, dignified, and utterly unshakable in your composure. Can you do that? Eleanor thought of her years in service, of the countless times she had swallowed pride and maintained perfect courtesy in the face of condescension. Yes, I can do that. Lady Thornbury spent the next month preparing Eleanor as though for battle. New dresses were commissioned, elegant but not ostentatious, fashionable but not frivolous. A lady's maid was hired to teach Eleanor the intricacies of society hairstyles and the subtle language of fans and gloves. Lady Thornbury drilled her on the genealogies of important families, the alliances and enmities that shaped Hampshire society, the topics that were safe and those that were dangerous. Knowledge is armor, Lady Thornbury said. If you know more about them than they know about you, you hold the power. Catherine's letters grew increasingly excited as the ball approached. Alexander is transformed, she wrote. He smiles again, he laughs. Everyone is speculating about what has changed, but he refuses to say anything except that he has renewed hope for the future. Oh, Eleanor, I can barely contain myself. To have you back, to have you as my sister, it's everything I've dreamed of. But not all the letters were encouraging. An anonymous note arrived one morning, written in an elegant hand. A paid companion playing at Duchess. How amusing. Enjoy your moment, Miss Hartley, it won't last. Eleanor showed it to Lady Thornbury, who snorted in disgust. Lady Pemberton, unless I miss my guess, or possibly that cousin Edmund Sterling, ignore it. People who write anonymous letters are cowards who know their opinions, can't withstand scrutiny. The day finally came to depart for Hampshire. Lady Thornbury's coach was luxurious, fitted with velvet cushions and every comfort, but Eleanor barely noticed. Her stomach churned with anxiety as they travelled through increasingly familiar countryside, as the spires of the village church came into view, as the coach finally turned onto the long drive leading to Ashford Hall. The house blazed with light, every window illuminated. The grounds transformed with lanterns hanging from trees and torches lining the paths. Carriages crowded the drive, disgorging elegantly dressed guests. Eleanor's hands trembled as their coach pulled up to the entrance. "Courage," Lady Thornbury murmured. "Remember, you belong here. Not because of Alexander, but because of who you are." They were announced in the entrance hall. Lady Thornbury and Miss Eleanor Hartley. Eleanor felt every eye turn toward them, felt the weight of speculation and judgment. Then Catherine was there, rushing forward with unladylike enthusiasm to embrace her. "Eleanor! Oh, I've missed you so!" Catherine's genuine affection was a balm to Eleanor's nerves. "Come, you must see how we've decorated the ballroom. Alexander spared no expense. It's absolutely magical." But before they could move, a familiar voice cut through the chatter. "Miss Hartley, how unexpected to see you here." Lady Pemberton stood with her daughters, her expression a masterpiece of false sweetness. "I had heard you were in London, serving as companion to Lady Thornbury. How kind of her ladyship to bring you along to such an important event." Miss Hartley is my guest, not my servant," Lady Thornbury said coldly. "A distinction I'm sure even you can grasp, Constance." The use of Lady Pemberton's Christian name, delivered with such cutting formality, was a deliberate insult. Lady Pemberton's smile froze. Of course, I meant no offence, though one does wonder at the propriety of inviting a former employee to a social occasion of this magnitude. Though one might also wonder at the propriety of spreading malicious gossip, Lady Thornbury replied, but I suppose we all have our little failings. Before Lady Pemberton could respond, Alexander appeared. He was magnificent in evening dress, every inch the Duke, but his eyes were only for Eleanor. He bowed to his aunt, then turned to Eleanor with a smile that made her heart race. Miss Hartley, I'm delighted you could attend. Would you do me the honour of the first dance? It was a deliberate public declaration. The first dance was traditionally reserved for the most honoured guest or the lady a gentleman was courting. By claiming it, Alexander was announcing his intentions to everyone present. Eleanor curtsied. The honour would be mine, Your Grace. The ballroom was indeed magical. Hundreds of candles in crystal chandeliers, flowers massed in every corner, the orchestra already playing softly as guests assembled. When the first dance was announced, a waltz, Alexander led Eleanor onto the floor. The moment his hand touched her waist, the moment they began to move together, the rest of the room seemed to fade. They had never danced together before, but they moved as though they had practiced for years, perfectly in sync. You're trembling, Alexander murmured. I'm terrified. Don't be. You're the most remarkable woman in this room, and I'm the luckiest man in England. People are staring. Let them stare. Let them see that I've chosen you, that I'm proud to be seen with you. Eleanor, you're radiant. You belong here. As they turned, Eleanor caught glimpses of faces in the crowd. Some were openly disapproving. Lady Pemberton looked as though she'd bitten into a lemon. Others were curious, reassessing. A few were openly envious, watching Alexander with longing. When the dance ended, Alexander didn't immediately release her. There's someone I want you to meet. He led her to where an elderly gentleman stood with a younger woman. Lord Ashworth, Lady Ashworth, may I present Miss Eleanor Hartley. Eleanor, Lord Ashworth is one of my father's oldest friends, and his opinion carries considerable weight in the county. Lord Ashworth studied Eleanor with shrewd eyes. Miss Hartley? I've heard a great deal about you, some of it quite scandalous. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. I'm sure you have, my lord. I can only hope that my conduct tonight will speak more truthfully than gossip. Well said. Tell me, Miss Hartley, what do you think of the proposed reforms to the poor laws? It was a test, Eleanor realized. He was assessing whether she had the intelligence and education to function in Alexander's world. She took a breath and answered thoughtfully, drawing on discussions she'd had with Dr. Whitmore and Lady Thornbury about the need for reform, balanced against the dangers of creating dependency. Lord Ashworth listened intently, occasionally interjecting questions. Finally, he nodded. You're well-informed and thoughtful. Ashford, you've chosen wisely. Miss Hartley, I look forward to knowing you better. It was an endorsement, and Eleanor saw Alexander's relief. If Lord Ashworth approved, others would follow. The evening progressed in a blur of introductions and careful conversations. Some guests were openly warm. Catherine's friends, families who valued intelligence over pedigree. Others were coolly polite, reserving judgment. A few were openly hostile, though they masked it with elaborate courtesy. Eleanor danced with several gentlemen, always aware of Alexander's eyes following her around the room. She spoke with ladies about literature and music, carefully avoiding any topic that might be considered inappropriate for her ambiguous social position. She smiled until her face ached, maintained perfect posture until her back screamed, and never once let her composure slip. Then Edmund Sterling appeared. He had clearly been drinking, his face flushed, his eyes glittering with malice. He cornered Eleanor near the refreshment table, blocking her path. Miss Hartley, or should I say, the future Duchess of Ashford, how quickly fortunes change. Lord Sterling, if you'll excuse me, I don't think I will. You see, I'm curious. What exactly did you do to ensnare my cousin? He's not a fool. Yet he's behaving like one. Did you compromise him somehow? Threaten scandal if he didn't marry you? Eleanor felt ice flood her veins. You're drunk, Lord Sterling. I suggest you find somewhere to sleep it off. I'm drunk enough to say what everyone else is thinking. You're a fortune hunter, Miss Hartley. A clever one, I'll grant you, but a fortune hunter nonetheless. You saw an opportunity and seized it. How very enterprising. That's enough, Edmund. Alexander's voice was deadly quiet. He had appeared beside them, his expression thunderous. You will apologize to Miss Hartley immediately, or you will leave this house and never return. Apologize? For speaking the truth? For insulting a lady under my protection? Choose, Edmund. Now. The ballroom had gone silent, everyone watching the confrontation. Edmund looked around, seemed to realize he had overplayed his hand, and forced out, My apologies, Miss Hartley. The wine has made me forget my manners. Apology accepted, Eleanor said quietly, though her hands were shaking. I hope you feel better in the morning, Lord Sterling. It was gracious, dignified, and exactly the right response. Edmund flushed darker and stalked away. The orchestra, taking a cue from Alexander's nod, immediately struck up a new dance, and conversation resumed. But the damage was done. Edmund had voiced what many were thinking, had given form to the whispers. Eleanor felt the weight of judgment pressing down on her, felt her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. I need air, she whispered to Alexander. He immediately offered his arm. The terrace? They stepped out into the cool night air, away from the heat and noise and watching eyes. Eleanor gripped the stone balustrade, taking deep breaths, fighting tears. I'm sorry, Alexander said. Edmund is a vicious drunk. I should have anticipated. He's right, though, isn't he? That's what people think, that I'm a fortune hunter who trapped you somehow. Eleanor, no. How can we do this, Alexander? How can we build a life together when half of society believes I'm using you? He turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. We do it by proving them wrong, by building a marriage based on love and respect and partnership, by showing them day after day, year after year, that what we have is real. It won't be easy. There will be more moments like this, more people like Edmund who try to tear us down. But Eleanor, I don't care. I would rather face a lifetime of their disapproval with you than a lifetime of their approval without you. You say that now. I'll say it always. Eleanor, look at me. Do you trust me? She met his eyes, saw the absolute certainty there, the unwavering commitment. Yes. Then trust that I know what I'm doing. Trust that I've counted the cost and found it worthwhile. Trust that my love for you is stronger than society's judgment. Before she could respond, Catherine appeared in the doorway. Alexander, you're needed inside. Lord Ashworth wants to propose a toast, and it would be odd if you weren't there. Alexander squeezed Eleanor's hand. Will you be all right? Yes. Go. I'll be in shortly. He left reluctantly, and Catherine immediately moved to Eleanor's side. Don't let Edmund upset you. He's always been jealous of Alexander, always looking for ways to hurt him. This is about their rivalry, not about you. It feels very much about me. Only because you're what Alexander wants most. Edmund can't bear to see him happy. But Eleanor, you should know, most people in there are on your side. I've been listening to conversations all evening. Yes, some disapprove, but many more are charmed by you. Lady Ashworth told me you were refreshingly intelligent. Mrs. Thornton said you were remarkably composed for someone in such a difficult position. Even some of the young ladies who came hoping to catch Alexander's eye have admitted you're not what they expected. What did they expect? Someone grasping and obvious, I think. Instead, they found someone educated and gracious. It's confusing their prejudices, which is exactly what we want. Eleanor managed to smile. When did you become so wise about social strategy? I learned from watching you handle Lady Pemberton. You never lost your temper, never stooped to her level. You just maintained your dignity, and eventually she looked petty by comparison. That's what you need to do now. Come back inside, hold your head high, and show them that Edmund's insults can't touch you. They returned to the ballroom together. Alexander was indeed giving a toast, thanking his guests for attending, expressing his pleasure at seeing old friends and making new ones. His eyes found Eleanor's across the room, and he raised his glass slightly in her direction, a private acknowledgement that made her heart swell. The rest of the evening passed more smoothly. Eleanor danced, conversed, and gradually felt her confidence returning. She noticed that several people who had been cool earlier were now warmer, as though her grace under Edmund's attack had earned their respect. As midnight approached and guests began to depart, Lord Ashworth sought Eleanor out. "Miss Hartley, a word before I leave. I wanted you to know that I'll be speaking to several friends about you, favorably. What Edmund did tonight was disgraceful, and your response was exemplary. You have the makings of an excellent duchess, and I'll make sure people know I think so. Thank you, my lord. Your support means more than I can say. Ashford is like a son to me. I want to see him happy, and it's clear you make him happy. That's all that matters in the end." When the last guest had departed, when the servants were clearing away glasses and extinguishing candles, Eleanor found herself alone with Alexander in the now empty ballroom. She was exhausted, emotionally wrung out, but also strangely exhilarated. "We survived," she said. "We did more than survive. Eleanor, you were magnificent. The way you handled Edmund, the way you won over Lord Ashworth. I've never been more proud of anyone. I couldn't have done it without you. Without knowing you believed in me." He crossed to her, taking both her hands in his. "I'll always believe in you. And now I have something to ask you. I know we agreed to wait 6 months before making a formal announcement, but after tonight, after seeing you shine in society, I don't want to wait any longer. Eleanor Hartley, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Officially, publicly, with an announcement in the Times and a ring on your finger." Eleanor's breath caught. "Are you sure? It's only been a few months since the scandal." "I'm absolutely sure. Tonight proved that society can accept us. It won't be unanimous, but we have enough support to weather the opposition, and I'm tired of pretending, tired of careful courtship and strategic patience. I want the world to know you're mine and I'm yours." Eleanor thought about the evening, about the mixture of acceptance and hostility, about the long road still ahead. Then she thought about Alexander's unwavering support, about Catherine's friendship, about Lady Thornbury's wisdom. She thought about the alternative, a life of safety and obscurity, forever wondering what might have been. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you. Officially, publicly, with all the world watching." Ah, he kissed her then, in the empty ballroom with candles guttering around them, and Eleanor felt as though she were dancing again, spinning through space with only his arms to anchor her, trusting him to keep her safe as they waltzed toward an uncertain but luminous future. The golden cage had not just opened, it had transformed into something else entirely, not a prison, but a palace, not a limitation, but a launching point. And Eleanor, who had spent so many years making herself small and invisible, was finally ready to take up space, to be seen, to claim the life she deserved. The battle wasn't over. There would be more challenges, more Edmund Sterlings and Lady Pembertons trying to tear them down. But tonight had proven they could face those challenges together, and that made all the difference. The announcement appeared in the Times 3 days later. "The Duke of Ashford is pleased to announce his engagement to Miss Eleanor Hartley, daughter of the late Reverend Thomas Hartley of Derbyshire. The wedding will take place in 6 months at the chapel of Ashford Hall." The reaction was immediate and divided. Some newspapers praised the Duke's choice of a woman of character and education over mere fortune and title. Others questioned whether a gentleman of his Grace's standing should ally himself with a woman of such modest origins. The society pages buzzed with speculation, analysis, and thinly veiled criticism. Eleanor read the papers in Lady Thornbury's London drawing-room, her stomach churning with each new opinion piece. Lady Thornbury snatched the latest paper from her hands. "Stop torturing yourself. Half these writers have never met you, and the other half are simply filling column inches. What matters is what the people who know you think, and they're solidly in your corner." It was true. Letters of congratulation arrived daily, from Lord Ashworth, from several families Eleanor had met at the ball, from Catherine's friends who had found Eleanor charming. Even some of the initially sceptical guests wrote to express their approval, noting that Eleanor's conduct had been irreproachable and her intelligence remarkable. But there were also anonymous letters, some merely snide, others genuinely threatening. "You'll never be accepted," one read. "The Duke will tire of you within a year. And then where will you be?" Another was more direct. "Fortune-hunting whore. You should be ashamed." Alexander, when Eleanor showed him these during his next visit to London, went white with rage. Who would write such filth? Does it matter? They're cowards hiding behind anonymity. It matters because they're trying to hurt you, to make you doubt yourself. Eleanor, you can't let them succeed. I'm trying not to. But Alexander, sometimes I wonder if they're right. Not about being a fortune hunter. I know that's not true. But about acceptance. What if I can never truly belong in your world? What if I'm always the outsider, the one who doesn't quite fit? He pulled her close, his voice fierce against her hair. Then we'll create our own world. Eleanor, I'm not asking you to fit into some predetermined mold. I'm asking you to be yourself and to let me build a life with you that honors who you are, not who society thinks you should be. That's a beautiful sentiment, but practically speaking, we have enough wealth and position to set our own terms. Yes, we'll fulfill our social obligations. Yes, we'll maintain the estate and support the community. But we'll also create space for what matters to us. Your love of learning, my interest in agricultural reform, Catherine's artistic pursuits. We'll be a family that values substance over superficiality. Eleanor wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that love and determination could overcome the rigid hierarchies of their world. But doubt gnawed at her, fed by every critical article, every anonymous letter, every memory of Lady Pemberton's contempt. The wedding preparations became a battlefield of social politics. Lady Thornbury took charge with military precision, navigating the complex etiquette of who should be invited, who could be safely excluded, how to balance Alexander's social obligations with Eleanor's more modest connections. "We'll invite everyone who matters," Lady Thornbury declared, "and make it clear that anyone who declines is declaring themselves an enemy of the Ashford family. Most people won't risk that, even if they disapprove of the match." Catherine threw herself into the preparations with enthusiasm, insisting on helping Eleanor choose her wedding dress, plan the flowers, select the music. "This is the sister I always wanted," she told Eleanor during one of their planning sessions. "Not just someone who married into the family, but someone I would have chosen as a sister regardless. You've given me back my brother. He was so grim before you came, so burdened by responsibility. Now he laughs again, he hopes again." But not everyone in the family was supportive. Alexander's uncle, Lord Reginald Ashford, arrived in London demanding an audience. He was a stern man in his 60s, with the Ashford dark eyes, but none of Alexander's warmth. "This marriage is a mistake," he told Alexander bluntly, while Eleanor sat beside him in Lady Thornbury's drawing-room. "You're the Duke of Ashford. You have a responsibility to the family name, to the lineage. You should be marrying someone who brings political connections, substantial dowry, impeccable bloodlines. Instead, you're marrying a vicar's daughter, with nothing to recommend her but a pretty face and a sad story." "Uncle Reginald," Alexander said with dangerous calm, "you will speak respectfully of my fiancée, or you will leave." "I'm speaking truth. The family has standards, Alexander. Your father understood that. Your grandfather understood that. You're letting sentiment override duty." Eleanor felt her face burn, but before she could speak, Lady Thornbury intervened. "Reginald, you pompous fool! Your own mother was the daughter of a country squire with barely £200 a year. The only reason the family accepted her was because your father loved her enough to fight for her. You've conveniently forgotten that history, but I haven't." Lord Reginald sputtered. "That was different. It was exactly the same. Every generation, the family clutches its pearls over some marriage that doesn't meet their exacting standards, and every generation, those marriages turn out perfectly well. Eleanor is educated, principled, and devoted to Alexander. That's more than can be said for half the society marriages I've witnessed. She was a paid companion. She was a gentlewoman fallen on hard times through no fault of her own. There's no shame in honest work, Reginald, though I realize that concept is foreign to someone who's lived off family money his entire life." The argument escalated until Alexander stood, his voice cutting through the discord. "Enough. Uncle Reginald, I respect your concern for the family, but my decision is made. I'm marrying Eleanor in 6 months, with or without your approval. I would prefer to have your support, but I won't sacrifice my happiness to obtain it." Lord Reginald looked between them, his expression rigid with disapproval. "You're making a mistake you'll regret, but I can see you won't be dissuaded. Very well, I'll attend the wedding, for the sake of family unity. But don't expect me to pretend enthusiasm for this misalliance." After he left, Eleanor felt tears threatening. "Perhaps he's right. Perhaps I'm being selfish, letting you sacrifice your family's approval for my sake." "He's not right, and you're not being selfish." Alexander took her hands, his grip firm. "Eleanor, every family has members like Uncle Reginald, people so bound by convention they can't see past it. But they don't speak for the whole family. My aunt supports us. Catherine adores you. And the people whose opinions I truly value have all expressed their approval. But what about the people who depend on you? The tenants, the servants, the community? What if they lose respect for you because of me? Then I'll earn it back through my actions, not through whom I marry. Eleanor, leadership isn't about maintaining some pristine image. It's about making difficult decisions and standing by them. I'm choosing you, and I'm prepared to defend that choice to anyone who questions it." Lady Thornbury poured them all brandy, despite the early hour. "What you're both forgetting is that scandal has a remarkably short lifespan. In 6 months, there will be some new controversy for society to obsess over, and your marriage will be old news. The key is to weather the initial storm with dignity and then simply live your lives well. Success is the best revenge." As the wedding approached, Eleanor found herself caught between anticipation and dread. The dress was completed, a creation of ivory silk and Brussels lace that made her look like someone she barely recognized. The guest list was finalized. Over 300 people, including several members of the aristocracy, numerous country families, and a handful of Eleanor's own modest connections, including her former headmistress and a few childhood friends. "It's going to be a spectacle," Catherine said, not without satisfaction. "Everyone wants to see the woman who captured the Duke's heart. You'll be the most scrutinized bride in England." The thought made Eleanor's anxiety spike. What if I make some terrible mistake? What if I use the wrong fork or address someone incorrectly or... Then you'll be human, and people will relate to you more. Eleanor, stop trying to be perfect. Just be yourself. That's who Alexander fell in love with. 2 months before the wedding, Edmund Sterling made one final attempt at sabotage. He arrived at Ashford Hall unannounced, demanding to see Alexander. Eleanor was there, reviewing seating arrangements with Catherine when Edmund was shown into the drawing room. "Cousin," Edmund said, his smile sharp. "And Miss Hartley. How domestic. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "What do you want, Edmund?" Alexander's tone was glacial. "I've come to make you an offer, a generous one considering the circumstances. I'll pay Miss Hartley £10,000 to break the engagement and leave England. She can start fresh somewhere else, the continent perhaps, or America. No one need ever know about this unfortunate episode. The room went silent. Eleanor felt as though she'd been slapped. Catherine gasped. Alexander's face went dangerously still. You're offering to bribe my fiancée to leave me. I'm offering her a way out of an impossible situation. Come now, Miss Hartley, you must see reason. You'll never be truly accepted. You'll spend your life being whispered about, judged, found wanting. £10,000 is enough to live comfortably for years. You could be free. Eleanor stood, her voice shaking with fury. I am free, Lord Sterling. Free to make my own choices. Free to marry the man I love. Free to build the life I want. Your money doesn't interest me, and your opinion interests me even less. You're a fool, then. That money is more than you'd see in a lifetime of work. Perhaps, but it's not worth my happiness, and it's certainly not worth Alexander's. Now I believe you should leave. Edmund's expression twisted with malice. You'll regret this. Both of you. I'll make sure of it. Is that a threat? Alexander moved to stand beside Eleanor, his presence protective. It's a promise. I have information about Miss Hartley's past. Information that would be very damaging if it became public. Unless she accepts my offer, I'll have no choice but to share it. Eleanor's heart stopped. What information could he possibly have? Her past was modest but blameless, or so she had thought. What information? Alexander demanded. Let's just say that Miss Hartley's father wasn't quite the saint she's portrayed him as. There were debts, Eleanor, gambling debts. Your father died owing money to some very unsavory people. I have the records to prove it. Eleanor felt the world tilt. It was true. She had discovered after her father's death that he had a secret vice, that he had gambled away much of their small savings in the months before his death. She had been too ashamed to tell anyone, had simply paid what she could and fled to London to escape the creditors. My father's debts have nothing to do with my character, she said, though her voice wavered. Don't they? The daughter of a gambling vicar, reduced to working as a servant, now trying to marry a duke. It paints quite a picture, doesn't it? Society will wonder what other secrets you're hiding, what other lies you've told. Get out! Alexander's voice was deadly. Get out of my house, and if you ever threaten Eleanor again, I will destroy you. I don't care if you're family. I don't care what information you think you have. You will not extort or intimidate the woman I love. You're making a mistake. The only mistake I made was tolerating your presence this long. You have 1 minute to leave before I have you physically removed. Edmund looked between them, seemed to realize he had overplayed his hand again, and stalked out. The moment he was gone, Eleanor collapsed into a chair, her composure finally shattering. It's true, she whispered, about my father. I should have told you, but I was so ashamed. He was a good man, Alexander, but he had this weakness, and it destroyed him. I paid what I could of his debts, but there wasn't enough money. I had to leave everything behind, start over with nothing. Alexander knelt beside her chair, taking her hands. Eleanor, look at me. I don't care about your father's debts. I don't care about Edmund's threats. None of that changes how I feel about you. But society will care if Edmund spreads this story. Then we'll face it together. Eleanor, everyone has secrets. Everyone has family members who've made mistakes. It doesn't define you. Your father's gambling doesn't make you less worthy, less intelligent, less remarkable. It just makes you human. Catherine was crying. Edmund is vile. How can he be so cruel? Because he's desperate, Lady Thornbury said, having entered during the confrontation. He's always been jealous of Alexander, always felt he deserved more than his position as a minor branch of the family. He thought if he could drive Eleanor away, Alexander might turn to someone Edmund could manipulate. But he's failed, and now he's lashing out. What if he does spread the story? Eleanor asked. Then we control the narrative. We acknowledge it openly. Your father struggled with gambling in his final months. You dealt with the aftermath with courage and dignity. You've never tried to hide your modest circumstances. We frame it as a story of resilience, not shame. Society respects honesty, Eleanor. It's the cover-ups that destroy people, not the truth. Over the following weeks, they did exactly that. Alexander made it known, through carefully placed conversations, that Eleanor's father had faced difficulties before his death, that Eleanor had handled the situation with remarkable maturity. By the time Edmund tried to spread his damaging information, it was already old news, and his attempt to weaponize it made him look petty rather than Eleanor look suspicious. Lord Ashworth, hearing of Edmund's behaviour, publicly cut him, refusing to receive him or acknowledge him at social events. Others followed suit. Edmund found himself increasingly isolated, his reputation damaged by his own malice. "Justice," Catherine said with satisfaction when they heard that Edmund had left Hampshire for London, his tail between his legs. "He tried to hurt you and ended up hurting himself." As the wedding day approached, Eleanor found her anxiety transforming into something else, a quiet confidence, a sense of rightness. She had faced the worst society could throw at her: gossip, threats, attempts at extortion, and she had survived. More than survived, she had proven herself capable, resilient, worthy. The night before the wedding, Lady Thornbury came to Eleanor's room. "I have something for you," she said, presenting a velvet box. Inside was a stunning sapphire necklace, the stones deep blue and luminous. "This was my mother's," Lady Thornbury said. "She wore it at her wedding, and I wore it at mine. I want you to wear it tomorrow. You're family now, Eleanor, not because you're marrying Alexander, but because you've earned your place through your character and courage. I'm proud to call you my niece." Eleanor embraced the old woman, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for everything. I couldn't have done this without you." "Nonsense! You could have done it alone. You're stronger than you know, but I'm glad I could help. Now get some sleep. Tomorrow you become a duchess, and you'll need your energy." But Eleanor couldn't sleep. She stood at her window, looking out at the moonlit gardens of Ashford Hall, thinking about the journey that had brought her here. A year ago she had been a paid companion, invisible and insignificant. Now she was about to marry a duke, to take on responsibilities she had never imagined, to step into a life that still felt impossibly grand. But she was ready. She had proven to herself, if not to everyone else, that she belonged, not because of her title or her position, but because of who she was: intelligent, compassionate, strong enough to face adversity, and gracious enough to forgive those who had tried to tear her down. Tomorrow she would walk down the aisle of Ashford Chapel and pledge her life to Alexander. Tomorrow she would become the Duchess of Ashford. But tonight she was simply Eleanor Hartley, a vicar's daughter who had dared to hope for more, who had fought for her happiness, who had refused to let society's judgment define her worth. And that, she realized, was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, as though even the weather had conspired to bless the occasion. Eleanor woke to find Catherine already in her room, bouncing with excitement. "It's your wedding day." "Oh, Eleanor, I can barely contain myself. Come, we have so much to do. Your bath is ready, and the hairdresser will be here within the hour. Lady Thornbury says we must begin preparations immediately if we're to have you ready in time." The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Eleanor was bathed, perfumed, and dressed with meticulous care. Her hair was arranged in an elaborate style, with small white roses woven through the curls. Lady Thornbury's sapphire necklace gleamed at her throat, and matching earrings, a gift from Alexander, sparkled at her ears. When the wedding dress was finally fastened, when Eleanor stood before the mirror and saw herself transformed, she barely recognized the woman looking back. The ivory silk gown fit perfectly, the lace overlay catching the light with every movement. She looked like a duchess, she realized with wonder. She looked like she belonged. "You're beautiful," Catherine breathed, tears in her eyes. "Alexander is going to weep when he sees you." Lady Thornbury nodded approvingly. "You'll do. Now remember, walk slowly down the aisle, keep your head high, and don't trip on your train. Everything else will take care of itself." The chapel at Ashford Hall was a medieval structure of honey-coloured stone, with stained glass windows that cast rainbow patterns across the ancient flagstones. As Eleanor's carriage approached, she could see that every pew was filled, that people lined the path to catch a glimpse of the bride. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Courage," Lady Thornbury murmured beside her. She had insisted on accompanying Eleanor to the chapel, standing in for the father Eleanor no longer had. "You've faced worse than this and prevailed. Today is your triumph, Eleanor. Claim it." The chapel doors opened, and the organ swelled with the opening notes of Handel. Eleanor took a deep breath, placed her hand on Lady Thornbury's arm, and stepped into her future. The chapel was a sea of faces, some friendly, some curious, some still skeptical. But Eleanor's eyes found Alexander immediately, standing at the altar in his formal dress, and the rest of the world fell away. His expression when he saw her was everything she could have hoped for: wonder, love, and something that looked very much like reverence. She walked down the aisle slowly, as instructed, aware of every eye upon her, but caring only for the man waiting at the end. When she reached the altar, when Lady Thornbury placed her hand in Alexander's, Eleanor felt a sense of rightness so profound it brought tears to her eyes. The ceremony was traditional, the words ancient and solemn, but when Alexander spoke his vows, his voice was thick with emotion, and when Eleanor responded, her voice was clear and strong. She was choosing this, claiming this, accepting not just a title, but a partnership, a life, a future built on love and mutual respect. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the bishop intoned. "Your Grace, you may kiss your bride." Alexander's kiss was gentle, reverent, and when they turned to face the congregation as the Duke and Duchess of Ashford, the applause was genuine and sustained. Eleanor saw Lord Ashworth beaming, saw Catherine crying happy tears, saw even some of the initially sceptical guests smiling with what looked like genuine approval. The wedding breakfast was held in Ashford Hall's grand ballroom, transformed with thousands of flowers and enough food to feed an army. Eleanor moved through the celebration in a daze, accepting congratulations, making conversation, playing her role as Duchess with a grace that surprised even herself. Lord Ashworth raised a toast. "To the Duke and Duchess of Ashford, may their marriage be blessed with love, happiness, and the courage to face whatever challenges life brings. Your Grace," he said, addressing Eleanor directly, "you have won the respect of this community through your character and dignity. We are honored to call you our Duchess." The applause that followed was warm and sustained. Eleanor felt Alexander's hand squeeze hers under the table, felt his pride and love radiating toward her. But the most meaningful moment came later, when an elderly woman approached Eleanor during the dancing. She was simply dressed, clearly not of the aristocracy, and she curtsied awkwardly. "Your Grace, forgive my boldness, but I wanted to thank you. I'm Mrs. Cooper. My husband is a tenant on the Ashford estate. My daughter was in service, and she was dismissed from a household when she became ill. She had nowhere to go, no prospects. But Lady Catherine told me that you had suggested His Grace establish a fund to help former servants in distress. Because of that fund, my daughter received medical care and training for a new position. You saved her life, Your Grace. I wanted you to know that." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. She had indeed suggested such a fund to Alexander, drawing on her own experiences of how precarious life could be for women in service. She hadn't realized it had already helped anyone. "I'm so glad your daughter is well, Mrs. Cooper. Please give her my best wishes." After Mrs. Cooper left, Alexander pulled Eleanor into his arms for a dance. "You see, you're already making a difference, already using your position to help others. That's the kind of Duchess I knew you would be. I just remembered what it felt like to be vulnerable, to have no safety net. If I can use my position to help others in that situation, then perhaps all the difficulty of getting here was worthwhile. It was worthwhile because it brought us together. Everything else is just a bonus." The celebration continued late into the night, but eventually the guests began to depart. Catherine hugged Eleanor fiercely. You're truly my sister now. I'm so happy I could burst." Lady Thornbury's farewell was more restrained, but no less affectionate. "You've done well, my dear, better than I dared hope. Now go and be happy. You've earned it." Finally, Eleanor and Alexander were alone in the ducal apartments, rooms that were now Eleanor's as much as his. She stood at the window, looking out at the moonlit grounds, still wearing her wedding dress, still processing the enormity of what had happened. Alexander came to stand behind her, his arms encircling her waist. "What are you thinking? That a year ago I was a paid companion with no prospects and no hope, and now I'm a duchess, married to the man I love, with the opportunity to make a real difference in people's lives. It feels like a dream." "It's not a dream, it's real and it's ours. Eleanor, I promise you, I will spend every day of our marriage making sure you never regret choosing me, choosing this life." She turned in his arms, reaching up to cup his face. "I could never regret it. You've given me everything I never dared to want. Love, partnership, purpose. I'm the luckiest woman in England. I'm the lucky one. You could have chosen safety with Dr. Whitmore, or you could have accepted Edmund's bribe and started fresh somewhere else. Instead, you chose the difficult path, the uncertain path. You chose me, despite all the obstacles. That's a gift I'll never take for granted." They stood together in the moonlight, two people who had defied society's expectations to build something real and lasting. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy. There would still be people who disapproved, still moments of doubt and difficulty. But they would face it together, and that made all the difference. 6 months later, Eleanor stood in the drawing room of Ashford Hall, reviewing plans for a new school she was establishing in the village. It would provide education for both boys and girls, regardless of their family's ability to pay, a radical concept that had met with some resistance, but also surprising support. "The building should be ready by autumn," she told Alexander, who was reviewing the budget. "And I've found an excellent headmistress, Miss Pemberton. No relation to Lady Pemberton, thank goodness. She's progressive in her views, but practical in her methods. You've thought of everything. I'm impressed. I had good teachers, Lady Thornbury and you. You showed me that privilege comes with responsibility, that we have an obligation to use our advantages to help others." Catherine entered carrying a letter. "This just arrived from London. It's from Lady Ashworth. She wants to know if you'll speak at a charity event she's organising for orphans. Apparently your reputation as a reforming duchess has spread, and people want to hear your views on education and social welfare." Eleanor felt a flutter of nervousness. Public speaking was still daunting, despite her growing confidence, but it was also an opportunity to advocate for causes she believed in. "Tell her yes, I'll speak." Alexander smiled. "That's my duchess." Terrified, but doing it anyway. "Isn't that the definition of courage? Being afraid but acting regardless?" "It is. And you, my love, are the most courageous person I know." The charity event in London was Eleanor's first major public appearance as an advocate rather than simply as Alexander's wife. She spoke about the importance of education for all children, about the need to provide opportunities for those born into poverty, about the moral obligation of the privileged to lift up those less fortunate. Her speech was met with sustained applause. Several influential women approached her afterward, expressing interest in supporting her school and asking about establishing similar institutions in their own communities. Eleanor found herself at the center of a movement she had inadvertently started, using her position to push for real social change. The newspapers, which had once questioned her suitability as Duchess, now praised her progressive vision and compassionate leadership. Even some of her harshest critics admitted that she was proving to be an asset to the Ashford family and to society at large. Lady Pemberton, encountering Eleanor at a social event, was forced to offer grudging congratulations. "Your Grace, I must admit I underestimated you. You've conducted yourself with admirable dignity." "Thank you, Lady Pemberton. I hope we can move forward without animosity." It was gracious, and it was strategic. Eleanor had learned that holding grudges served no purpose, that magnanimity was more powerful than revenge. Lady Pemberton would never be a friend, but she no longer needed to be an enemy. Edmund Sterling had disappeared from society entirely, his reputation destroyed by his own malice. Eleanor heard he had gone abroad, seeking opportunities in the colonies where his past wouldn't follow him. She felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only relief that he could no longer threaten her happiness. One afternoon, as Eleanor walked through the village with Catherine, a group of children ran up to them. They were students from the new school, excited to show the Duchess their progress. "Your Grace, I can read now," a little girl announced proudly. "Miss Pemberton says I'm her best student." Eleanor knelt down, heedless of her expensive dress. "That's wonderful. What's your favorite book?" "The one about the girl who goes on adventures. Miss Pemberton says girls can do anything boys can do, if they work hard, and don't let anyone tell them they can't." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "Miss Pemberton is absolutely right. You can do anything you set your mind to. Don't ever forget that." As they walked back to the hall, Catherine said, "You're changing things, Eleanor. Not just for those children, but for all of us. You're showing people that a duchess can be more than just a decorative figurehead, that she can be a force for real good in the world. I'm just doing what I can with the opportunities I've been given. That's more than most people do. You could have simply enjoyed your position, attended parties, and lived a life of leisure. Instead, you're working to make things better. That's remarkable." That evening, Eleanor and Alexander sat together in the library, her favorite room in the house. She was reading a new book on educational theory while he reviewed estate accounts. It was a comfortable, domestic scene, nothing grand or dramatic, just two people sharing space and silence. "Are you happy?" Alexander asked suddenly. Eleanor looked up, surprised by the question. "Profoundly. Are you? More than I ever thought possible. Sometimes I look at you and can't believe you're real, that you chose me, that we built this life together. I feel the same way. A year ago, I was convinced that happiness wasn't meant for people like me, that I should be grateful for safety and security and not hope for more. You taught me that I deserved more, that I was worthy of love and partnership and a life of meaning. You were always worthy. I just helped you see it." Eleanor set down her book and moved to sit beside him. "We helped each other see it. That's what partnership means, isn't it? Reflecting back to each other our best selves, supporting each other through difficulties, celebrating each other's triumphs. It is, and I can't wait to spend the rest of my life doing exactly that." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn low, content in each other's presence. Outside, the grounds of Ashford Hall stretched into darkness, the estate that was now Eleanor's home, her responsibility, her opportunity to make a difference. She thought about Mrs. Cooper's daughter, saved by the fund Eleanor had suggested. She thought about the children in the village school, learning to read and dream of futures beyond their circumstances. She thought about the women she was inspiring through her advocacy, showing them that change was possible if they had the courage to fight for it. She had bloomed where she was planted, just as Lady Thornbury had predicted. But more than that, she was helping others bloom as well, using her position not just for her own benefit, but for the benefit of those who had no voice, no power, no advocate. The golden cage had become a garden, and Eleanor was tending it with love and determination, nurturing growth wherever she could, proving that true nobility had nothing to do with birth and everything to do with character. Years later, when people spoke of the Duchess of Ashford, they would remember not the scandal of her origins, but the grace of her leadership, not the controversy of her marriage, but the love that had sustained it, not the obstacles she had faced, but the courage with which she had overcome them. She had been underestimated, dismissed, attacked, but she had prevailed, not through force or manipulation, but through dignity, intelligence, and an unwavering commitment to being true to herself. And in the end, That was the greatest triumph of all, not becoming someone else to fit society's expectations, but remaining herself and forcing society to expand its expectations to include her. Eleanor Hartley, the vicar's daughter who became a duchess, had written her own story, and it was a story of hope, resilience, and the transformative power of love, both romantic love and the broader love of humanity that drove her to make the world a better place. As she sat beside her husband in the firelight, Eleanor smiled. The journey had been difficult, the obstacles real, the pain genuine, but she had emerged stronger, wiser, more fully herself than she had ever been. She had bloomed where she was planted, and the garden she had created would flourish for generations to come. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments from which part of the world you're listening to this story. I want to know how far it has traveled.